than that, I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to answer any questions you have. And of course, please always reach out to me on LinkedIn or email, which I will put in the chat. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Nikki. My pitch is going to be a little bit longer because I've been here a little bit longer. I started at IBM in 1989. And just for ha-has, does anyone out there, well, there's not a lot of people out there, I won't bother with this, but I did not graduate with a technical degree. I graduated with a degree in creative writing. And as a matter of fact, if you go over to the creative writing department, there's a glass case with a couple of plaques in there, and my name is on one of them somewhere for winning an award. But yeah, I spent most of my time writing poetry and fiction. I grew my hair long and had earrings, and I had to take those earrings out, cut my hair to interview for IBM, where I became a technical writer as my first job. So that involves writing documents to explain how to use anything from tape drives to mainframe computers to disk drives, whatever you have. And back then the technology and the type of writing that we did was a lot different. Nowadays, it's we still do a lot of technical writing, but it's a much different game than when I first started. After doing that for a few years, my manager looked at me and said, you know, you can talk well and you seem organized and responsible. Would you like to try doing customer service? I said, okay, because I thought maybe my job depended on this or something. And I tried it for a while and it was a lot of fun. I got to work with customers around the world who would call and have complaints or good things to say, depending on the day, with an operating system called TPF, Transaction Processing Facility. And that's an operating system that a good number of the airlines use to reserve tickets, and Visa uses to do their online transaction processing. So I guarantee you your name is in one of those systems somewhere. I forgot to tell you too that when I first got hired, unlike Nikki, I had to go to 4 months of school at IBM called Basic Programming Education, where they taught me assembler language, which is machine language coding, and a couple of other things about programming. So I sort of got a crash course in programming. And after I was working in customer service for a while, I got very good at that. I developed processes and documents to be used on the team and helped educate customers on how to work better with us. Because, you know, it's not like just calling up Dell or you know, whoever makes your laptop and complaining about it. They have to go through a process of what sort of things they have to submit to us, and there were ways that they connected with us that were much different than what we have now. Anyway, after doing that for a couple of years, somebody said, you know, you know all the people in the organization, you know what they work on. Would you like to try software testing? And I said, yeah, that sounds interesting. What does that mean? And they said, well, you get to break things. And that, I love that a lot. It means you get to try software and test it. A lot of people would love to be a software game tester, but that's a difficult job to get. So I got to test the software before we shipped it and find problems and ask people to fix it. This is an interesting job because what it effectively involves you doing is telling someone that their baby is ugly. You know, they worked really hard to make something and you go out and you break it and you say, this doesn't work, as you tell me it does, fix it, or we're not going to ship it. So there's some, it takes a little bit of intestinal fortitude to do a job like that. But I survived that for many years, probably about 15 if I count it right. And I took all sorts of leadership positions and tested all sorts of different things. And over all the years, everyone kept on telling me, you know, you should be a manager. And I said, I don't want to be a manager. That doesn't sound like fun. Oh, one day I kind of was looking for a career change and I decided, why not become a manager? And now I've been a manager of anywhere from 13 to 20 software developers. I like to say I'm a staff psychologist to them because a good portion of my job involves coaching them, listening to their problems, listening to their complaints, sometimes listening to how they don't get along with other people or how they need help figuring out a problem, or sometimes how they need help figuring out how to reconcile problems in their life and work. I hope that Nikki has seen that her manager is good at helping her in this, because it's something that we pride ourselves at in IBM. So that's where I am today. I do a lot of stuff with Oswego. Currently, I'm working with Bastian Tenbergen in the computer science department to help him run 2 classes. I'm acting as a stakeholder in the projects that the students are doing. I also work with the Ulster County Community College, another part of SUNY locally, to do the same thing with 2 professors there. And I love doing that because one of the things I never got to see, probably because of the career that I chose at Oswego, was people who come in and say, hey, this is how you take your degree and turn it into a job. This is what you can expect in the work world. I had my summer jobs like everybody else, but I didn't know what it meant to have a house, act like a professional, worry about a career, that kind of thing. And having advice on that kind of stuff is always a good thing. So that's one of the reasons why I like to give back to Oswego. Some of the other things I've done in IBM include some special assignments doing technical writing, working with the local business resource groups. Some people call these groups diversity groups or employee resource groups. So we have them for Black people, we have them for Asians and Pacific Islanders, we have them for LGBTQ, and we have a new one now that I helped develop and create, which is around neurodiversity. When I first became a manager, somebody approached me and said, wouldn't you like to help? Would you like to have an intern, an autistic intern for a few months? And I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. Yeah, I'd like to try that. But they said 6 months. And I said, no, I'd like to hire them permanently. If they have the skills that you're saying that they have, why can't I have one for their career? And so we found out that in IBM and many other companies, there aren't these structures in place to help autistic people get along with other people. They're like two different operating systems. They don't talk to each other, like a Macintosh and a PC maybe, is one way that I've heard it described. So I helped educate executives on that topic. I helped bring attention to the topic, and with some colleagues from Australia, Michigan, Ireland, several other countries, we all put together a way that IBM could now put in an autism hiring program like many of our peers do in the industry, like Microsoft, SAP, Dell Computer does it. A lot of our industry competitors and many other industries are now getting into it. So I'm particularly proud of that and the opportunity to do that kind of thing in IBM. Another thing I really liked about working at IBM is I got the opportunity to go on what's called Corporate Service Corps. Now, shortly before I graduated from Oswego, I applied to join the Peace Corps, and I was nearly accepted, but because I had a girlfriend at the time, I decided against it. And I regretted that for a long time. But with IBM Corporate Service Corps, what happened was I was sent away for a month with 14 or 13 other individuals from around the world from IBM to go to Mexico and help a government agency there refine their processes and work better with their clients. It was a great opportunity. I love Mexico. I love the Mexican people, and I got to see a lot of that. But I also got to see a lot of what IBM does for the world, both as someone who gives away stuff as a community, and also as an industry, what we do. And some of those things are things I've never even heard of or done, like what Nikki does. It's a huge company. We do a lot of stuff. We're 111 years old this year. We started off by making meat slicers, scales, punch cards, time card clocks that if you've ever heard the expression to punch in, that's what we made at first, and that was 100 years ago. Then after that, we started becoming one of the people who pioneered the manufacturing and development of computers, and we came up with some of the first languages. We worked with the government, we worked with the Defense Department, we worked with other companies. And over the years, we became a dominant force in the mainframe computer industry. Now, mainframe computers aren't as ubiquitous or important as they used to be, but they're still out there. And many Fortune 500 companies still use them. We still make mainframes. We do not make PCs or laptops anymore. And I can guarantee you your name and transactions that you have done with your credit card have gone through a mainframe somewhere. We also do a lot of newer computing technologies like AI, Watson. Watson is AI. We do quantum computing. We're very much leading in that area. And there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of different jobs. We're not just programmers. We're not just salespeople. We have HR people. We have marketing people. We have technical writers. We have creative writers. We have broadcast journalists working for us, communications people. You just go out to ibm.com/jobs and poke around, and you'll be surprised at what you see. With that, I think we can leave it open for questions now, or I can keep on talking about the different things that I've done, or a day in the life, or turn it back to Nikki. Whatever you guys think.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate that. I think my first question that I have for you guys, and it's more so directed towards Paul, with you doing this neurodiversity effort with your office, which is great. I definitely commend you, by the way, for that. What is some advice that you would give to students with different neurodiversities going into some of these places, and maybe going into some of these businesses and not having something like that set for them? What would you say is some advice that you can give that can help them to maybe set some of this up for themselves as well, or try and market themselves better as a student with neurodiversity in the job market?
That's a great question. And that's one of the things that we're trying to solve, to head off. It's a problem that we're working on. So one of the biggest barriers you face, of course, is neurodiverse or autistic people don't look you in the eye. They may not, or they may. They may not answer questions quite the way you think you ask them. If you tell them they're just a different way of thinking. And some of it times it's very, very logical. So think of characters in Star Trek like Data or Spock. That's sometimes how autistic people are. A popular image today too is that of Sheldon in I've forgotten the name of that show. It's not Third Rock from the Sun.
Big Bang Theory.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A lot of autistic people, some of them identify with that, some of them do not. It's important to remember that when dealing with autistic people, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. That's it. They're all different. But some of the common problems that they have are with socialization and with understanding clues that the rest of us seem to pick up. The best description I ever heard of it was a young man once told me it was like everybody else got a book on how to get along with the rest of the world, and they were left out. And that's a great explanation to it, because a lot of us sort of fall by the wayside trying to understand how to get along with each other in high school. We get made fun of because we're smart or whatever, and we lose a lot of talent that way. So when you're applying for a job, it helps to ask the employer that do they have some accommodations in place? Now, what are accommodations? Accommodations are what the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, say that you have to put in place in order to accommodate people so that they can work, disabled people so they can work at your place. Now, with physical disabilities, that's obvious. A wheelchair ramp, braille on signs for blind people, hearing devices and assistive devices for people who are hard of hearing. If a person is missing a limb, maybe they get they get some special keyboard to work with. However, people with neurodiversity or with autism or with differences like this don't quite view themselves as disabled, and the accommodations are different. So the accommodations are more things like, I need to explain very explicitly, I want you to do this, and these are the following steps by this time using this process. Because if I don't spell that all out, they become very confused and they don't know what to do. A funny example I hear of this is if you tell an autistic person to take out the garbage, they'll do it next week instead of right now. And the hidden message when your mother tells you take out the garbage is now. They don't always get that. I run into this with my son all the time. He was recently diagnosed as an autistic, and sometimes he takes what I say very logically. If I use a lot of idiom or I expect him to fill in the gaps, he can't do that. And it's not that he's stupid. He's an extremely smart person, but he just doesn't get how I communicate, how 95% of the rest of the world communicates. So you need to ask them, do they have accommodations for you, and what are those accommodations? And they should be able to provide those. And in IBM and other big companies, what we've started to do is we started to change our hiring process. In my opinion, the hiring process at most companies is a charm school candidate interview. If you show up looking good and you talk right and you can hit all the right notes, I don't care whether you're otherwise dumb as a box of rocks or Albert Einstein, you'll get hired. And I think that's a bad thing. Now, this isn't necessarily true with some places like, people who hire software engineers, because they are going to ask you to talk about code and to write code, but they're still expecting that attitude, a warm, friendly handshake, eye contact, talk about the weather. I've met a lot of autistic people who hate to talk about the weather. They really do. It just really bothers them, and they don't like to shake hands. They don't know how to act in certain situations. They seem rigid and stiff, but I assure you they are human beings and they're very smart. You can use their talents. So you need to change your hiring process. You need to change even your recruiting process. If you want to attract autistic talent, you do not put out something that says, hey, travel the world, meet people, work on fun teams. Some of them don't want to do that. So you got to change your ad to talk about the technical stuff, literally to the details of what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, what they're going to do. And when you have the interviews, you want to ask them, what sort of accommodations do you need? Some of them have physical or sensory needs. They don't like loud noises near them. They don't want bright lights. They may need extra time to answer questions. And I encourage you, if you are neurodivergent in some way, to ask what sort of accommodations they give, what sort of accommodations will they give you in an interview, and furthermore, what sort of accommodations will they give you when you're hired and throughout your career? Because it doesn't stop there. Yes, we can go and we can put in wheelchair ramps, and if they stay there and they don't rot or break apart, we can always get a person with a wheelchair into the office. And if they have the desk that they need and the right equipment at the right height, they can keep on working, going to the bathroom, going into conference rooms, and so on. That's great. But what happens is you get a person who's very excited about hiring an autistic person, and maybe they're a good manager, but after a few years, you don't have the same manager anymore. So will the next manager you have be able to do this? Boy, I hope so. So it's really it's a social thing, and I liken it more to a civil rights struggle than it is a disability struggle. And if they're not providing accommodations, ask them if they can provide them. One of the biggest obstacles that some people have is when they apply for a job. When I applied for a job, for example, with IBM, I actually checked the box that said, yes, I'm disabled because I have a hearing defect, and I have had it since I was born. So they said, oh, okay, great. We'll talk loud at you during the interview, and we'll send you off for a hearing exam, and we'll see if you need anything extra, depending on how bad your hearing is. But with autistic people, they don't like to admit that this is a disability. And I completely understand that. But what I urge you to do is to play the game. In other words, go and check that box that says, yes, I'm disabled, say you're autistic. Good companies that know about this now, like IBM, Microsoft, SAP, Ernst & Young, Dell Computer, they will then treat you according to your needs during your interview process, and hopefully put you on a career path where you will continually be accepted and accommodated for those needs that you have. So that's another important thing you want to know about, is check that box and ask the questions and check that box, and tell someone as soon as you get a recruiter talking to you, tell them, I am neurodivergent, what can you do for me? Because they should, by law.
Thank you, Paul. That's really good insight. I have a quick question for Nikki. So you had your bachelor's and your master's at SUNY Oswego. Was that like as soon as you finished your bachelor's, you immediately went into your master's?
Yeah, Vampola easily convinced me to do it.
Yeah.
I wasn't planning on it at all. I was just ready to go start working. And then Vampola was like, he was my advisor throughout the CogSci program. So he was like, you should really think about it, because you do a lot of research that relates to this master's, and what's the harm in it? And at first I was like, oh my God, do I have to do more school? I was like, can I afford this? But it was actually a very good decision, because IBM pays a lot of money for people who have a master's degree, and especially if you fit the box of a Black female, you get paid well. Like
Yeah,
that's
no, for
the
sure.
best thing. That's the best thing I could say about it was a blessing in disguise. Cause I just thought, oh, I'll get this master's, let's see what happens. And when I applied and everything that happened to me, I got supported a lot from IBM out of all the other companies I applied to, saying like, we value this skill set and we value that you fit this box that we're trying to bring up more in. We will offer you a lot to come here. So it definitely helped a lot. And I urge everyone, if you feel like you can do it, like I'm not going to push you if you don't really want to, but if you can do it and you can make it work, you might as well, because now I've noticed more companies are valuing people who have their master's degree in any sense. Like my master's degree, even though I can go into user design or user experience, I'm in sales right now in AI, and they still value that master's degree. And surprisingly, I use a lot of UI and UX principles in my role, because it's a lot of making demos for clients. What does a client want? And those are all practices from HCI. So I value it a lot. I also like 3 questions in the chat, but yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm going to ask them in a second. My follow-up question was, how did your extended learning at Oswego help you succeed at IBM?
Yeah, so I'm in this AI brand technical specialist role, right? And the extended learning, there were certain classes that I think were really valuable. Like they just like hit the nail on the head. Paul talked about that class with Bastian Tenbergen. I took that class, which is software design. And if you can apply that class to a lot of roles at IBM, whether it be sales, it's, if you're a developer or whatnot, like I use a lot of the tools I learned from that class in my daily IBM life. So there's some of that. And then in terms of extended learning, there's a level of, when you get into those higher classes, I guess, you're doing a lot of projects, you're doing a lot of research. It's not so much like in undergrad where you get taught things and you have to digest and then kind of regurgitate and whatnot. In those master's classes, they're giving you a lot of projects. And in IBM, at least in the roles I've encountered, everything's project based. We have a quarter, which is 3 months, right? In this 3-month time period, what can you get done? Like, what's the project you're gonna head up? How are you gonna design this out? What's our layout for planning? And then how do we execute that? And that's a lot of principles I just developed in that master's program, where it is the same thing as like for a semester, you have this project or you have these projects. How are you going to start? How are you going to keep yourself on schedule to finish? And like, how we're going to execute this out? And then also, how do you work with other people? I've constantly thrown other people all the time. So I have to figure out like, okay, how do I work with this person and this situation? And it might be the same, like where Paul was talking about before, is like, I have to ask them, how do you work? How does this work? Because this is how I work. How do you work? So then I can find the middle ground. And when you're done doing those group projects, which I know suck in college, but sadly, group projects never end. You're always going to work with somebody, whether it's someone you know really well in IBM. Like I sometimes get to work with friends and I'm like, great. And other times I'm on a client account that's huge and I have to work with 10 other people, and that can get very chaotic. So I have to make my boundaries really clear from the get-go. Like, this is how I work. This is what I believe in. This is what I do. And if I don't do that, I could get thrown anywhere. So it's one of those things where so a lot of the stuff I did in that master's program does come up a lot more frequently. And sometimes I'll sit there at the end of the day like, wow, Vampola was right. or Bastian was right, when I sit there like, damn, I really had to do this, which I thought I would never do, but it came back. So you'll be surprised how often things come back that you just thought, when am I going to do a Scrum meeting? And then Bastian was the one who taught me Scrum meetings, and literally I just had to do a Scrum meeting and figure out how to do a Gantt chart, which I've never, which I thought was never going to happen. easily happen. So these little things come back, really, they do.
Well, thank you for that insight. That's especially with me as someone who's about to go into my master's and just start that process. It's really important to hear. Our next question, it might just be for Paul, but Nikki, if you have insight too, please feel free to give your experience as someone who is underrepresented in the corporate community. So how does IBM market that aspect of the company to in terms to like being neurodiverse and making sure to accept LGBTQ people of color? How does IMB market that aspect of the company to make sure that prospective employees are aware of those programs and opportunities for their respective identities?
Yeah, there are special teams that go out and hire, directly to veterans. They go to historically Black colleges and universities and hire from there to try and fulfill their goals on that front. We've made it very clear through advertisement and social media that we support the LGBTQ community. I remember when the bathroom bills were floating through Texas, I was really shocked and proud to see my company speak out against those. And I knew some people who I worked with at the time who were very upset about it. They're no longer around. Uh, and then furthermore, with neurodiversity, it's a difficult game to do because we can create special hiring portals, and I know some companies that do that. We advertise it on our hiring portal, and you have a number of things around diversity and inclusion. And sometimes with these things, we're allowed to do special hiring pilots because for neurodiversity, for example, it is part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. We can then go and say, we're only going to hire neurodiverse people for this next project. And we can do that. We can hold special hiring events for that. But by and large, it's through social media, through our reputation, word of mouth, and our hiring portal. And by the way, we have also received many accolades over the years, sometimes repeatedly, for being an excellent place for women to work, an excellent place for LGBTQ to work, and now we're getting accolades for neurodiversity, and we got something that was sort of a general one saying, it's a great company to work all around because of diversity. And then lastly, there was one other accolade we got recently. We get all sorts of things like that, and that always helps because you go out on LinkedIn and you repost that and you hope people see it and they think, yeah, that's a place I want to work.
Yeah, I would say when I was in college, I knew that IBM was pretty diverse. I would say that once I got in, I realized how diverse it was. Like, you hear about little things, like you're like, oh, I know that, IBM was one of the first companies to hire Black people, like, so long ago, way before like the civil rights movement was happening. They even contributed a bit to the civil rights movement. So I heard some things here and there. I didn't realize how deep it was until I came in. And just like Paul mentioned about the Bathroom Act, when I was working in that consumer market, there was, chief of staff, my bad, chief of staff for the VP of distribution, and his name was Alan Torres, if you guys ever Google him. And I had a really good chance to interview and talk with him because he was a very big proponent of the Dreamers Act. And he publicly ran out and represented IBM with other IBMers who were dreamers. And they made a very strong stand of what they believed in. And that's where I thought IBM was amazing, because that was another very controversial act to stand on. And IBM is very big. So I was shocked that IBM was even kind of allowing them to speak out that publicly. Like, he was on NBC, like articles ran about him. I was like, wow. But he's very outspoken about it, and IBM accepted it. They even wrote a letter about it to send to Biden and others, just to talk about the Dreamers Act and where IBM stands on it. So it's in the news. IBM's in the news. You got to kind of find it. You'll figure it out. You'll also see it on social media and other places. But yeah, it's you'll see pockets of it on the outside, but on the inside, IBM really does like a lot. So yeah, it's around.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, we just finished, I don't know if Nikki did it yet, but I just finished my business conduct guidelines education for the year. That means they tell you this is how you're supposed to act. You take a couple of quizzes and you pass it. But in addition to that, we get sexual harassment and bullying training, diversity education. And it's gotten a lot more serious in the last couple of years. I'm really proud of that because they, in addition to including my favorite thing, which is about neurodiversity, we've supported Black Lives Matter. We supported Stop Asian Hate, a lot of things, by rolling out education almost as soon as these things happened in the news. The education rolled out, and I had to make sure all my people went through it. And I was proud of the way that we did it and proud of the education that was produced and the messages that we're getting out to people. I have learned a lot from my employer about these issues in the last couple of years.
No, yeah, IBM's training is very real. It happens every year. Everybody does it. It doesn't matter what group you belong to, like whether it's a client facing, which I am, or if you're just deep in like accounting, everybody takes those courses. Everyone has to know about sexual harassment in the workplace, about what's going on with certain diversity groups and what you can do to be, a helper, an advisor in those moments, or bullying or whatnot. Like business conduct guidelines are very serious at IBM. No one gets away with not doing it. So yeah, they make sure they consistently train you on these things.
Yeah, great. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, one addition, two things that I can see in the future for us coming to the fore of all companies are issues around mental health and also Native Americans. And we've already got groups spun up around them and educating people. It's great stuff to see.
Yeah, no, that is so awesome to hear, and I'm really glad that a company is taking such a active role in educating on such important issues. So the next question is for both of you. Could you talk more about the culture at IMB from the outside looking in? There seems to be a big focus on corporate and social responsibility and community, but could you expand more on from your perspectives?
Yeah, so from my perspective, IBM's culture is one, very diverse, as we've kind of hammered in. You meet people, we are a very international company. So you can get calls from anywhere. You get calls from people from the UK, people from Germany, people from Japan, South America. Like it's just a melting pot of a lot of stuff going on. At least this is from the sales side. I communicate with a lot of people. They do value corporate responsibility. That is a big push they're doing. They're now doing a big environmental corporate responsibility as well. We just acquired another company that focus on environmental sustainability within the corporate landscape using AI. So that's really great. We've kind of been talking about that for a while. If you look back on the history of IBM from the beginning, it's always been about getting large groups of people together, figuring out how we can make our products or services better, how we can change the lives of other companies, and how they look at how they do business and how they can make it smarter and better. And on top of that, it's just a lot of training and learning. So we have something at IBM called Think 40, where Paul knows about. Everyone is kind of in it. So as soon as you join IBM, they have a mission that you need to complete at least 40 hours of some type of learning. And this learning can be anything. You can watch a video about gender roles on IBM's Your Learning site, and that counts as your Think 40. You're doing something that you can do any type of learning. It's that I want to learn about AI today. I'll watch a couple of videos, maybe I'll do a little lab about it. That counts. I'm gonna listen to a thing about LGBTQ rights that I knew one of our older C-suite executives was really focused on, and you can watch videos of that counts as your Think 40. Or you can attend classes. I'm part of the business research group that Paul was mentioning earlier. I'm part of the New York Blacks business research group, and there's like a national one, but I deal with the New York one a lot. Me
You guys
attending
do a
those
lot of
classes,
stuff.
I know there's a lot. There's a lot of we call them our BRGs, but there's a lot of them. So I'm part. There's a women's one too. So usually I'm part of the New York women's and the New York Black BRGs, and I can attend those classes. Those count to my, I think, 40, and then you keep going, and then you can go above. And we really value that education and you just keeping, whether it's your technical skills, your social skills, or whatever, up to date, so you can stay with the current world.
Yeah, to add to what Nikki said, when I first started, it was really, we had a big reputation for hiring people of diversity, disabled people, and so on. But I think in the last 25 years, it's really taken off. I remember in the mid 90s when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was put in place and that kind of thing. IBM, without any government provocation or anything like that, just came out and said, we're going to allow you to give benefits to your domestic partner. So with that, they didn't say it had to be a woman if you were a man or a man if you were a woman. They just said you're a domestic partner, and they stipulated that this was a person that you had been living with for a certain amount of time, maybe a couple of years, and you shared finances. There was some way to prove all that. And this really irritated some people that I worked with. They came in and demanded an explanation from me. And I said, well, I'm not the CEO, but I said, this is a good thing. This is a smart business decision. It's not only the right thing to do from a human side, which I wasn't going to win the argument with them with, but I said, this is a great business decision. Why? Because we're going to be able to find markets and more money by appealing to these other groups of people. So it makes sense to work with them. And then from that time on, diversity groups started coming to the front, and we have all sorts of groups that we're involved with. But I got to say that the Black Network of New York, Nikki, is one of the best ones. They've got a lot of activities going on, social events too. So it's not all boring stuff. They do a lot of fun stuff. And then the other thing I'd like to say is that we are a very ethical company too. Like Nikki said, we're working towards sustainability goals and environmental goals. But furthermore, just finishing my business conduct guidelines for the year, we take a quiz and it says, well, what if someone offers you tickets to a Mets game if you sweeten the deal for them? You can't do that. And it sounds really silly and it sounds Boy Scoutish, but I'm proud of the fact that our company does not tolerate corruption, bribery, and any of a number of bad practices. And we're constantly being monitored and audited for it, which makes me sure that my company is going to be here another 100 years. And that provides me a sense of security that I like.
No,
Not
yeah.
to mention it makes it a good place to work. I know if I work with Nikki, she's going to be a good person, right?
No, yeah. There's no way. I'm in sales. It's very hard. I would say IBM, not that I would do it, but IBM makes it very hard for you to be corrupt in IBM. But if you're in sales, there's no way a client could come up to us being like, I have some tickets for something. Do you want to there's too many protocols in place to even try to be corrupt. So yeah, I haven't even ever heard so far in my career of a situation like that, but they do a lot to not let that happen.
That's great to hear about the company. So this question's for both of you. What is an aspect of your industry and/or role that you didn't expect to be the case when you entered the professional realm, good or bad?
Let's see. In our industry, so do you mean like, industry or role? Well, okay.
Like industry and/or role. So like, what's something you didn't expect was gonna be in the role, like good or bad?
So I never really did sales. Like at first I thought I was gonna go in a very researchy, like UI UX background within IBM, but then I was in IBM and I did an internship and I was like, let me try sales because it seems fun and whatnot. The one thing I didn't expect from sales is that I think sales, at least in maybe it's other companies or whatever, sales has like a really weird like thought behind it. People think that it's a very car salesman-y, like I'm just trying to push products on clients and I'm trying to make revenue and whatnot. And of course people in sales want to make money. There's no way they're not going to be in sales to make some commission, but you'd be surprised how much thought and how much strategic planning there is in sales, and how we're not really trying to sell anything. If we see that there is something that could truly benefit a company, then we work around it to show them like, this is the value. Like, one, you can save money. Two, you can be more environmentally sustainable, like that Invisi one I was talking about. Three, here's AI that's going to help you. Like, we're looking at the company to say, you could do this better. Like, well, we don't want you to struggle or be stuck in a place where it's so behind. We can help you be better. We want to. So I was really shocked that there was a lot of planning. Like right now I'm in this sales kickoff phase that we call at IBM, which is where I go through 4 days of very intense, from like 9 to 3 planning of, this is my accounts, this is my territory. Let's figure out what's going on in these spaces. Where can we help? Where can we not help? And sometimes not all the accounts I get need AI. They need something else before they could get to AI. So then I have to work with my teammates a lot to say, hey, they're not ready for this phase. Like, it would be a waste and unbeneficial to push on them. So you should help them in this phase. And then I can focus on the other spaces that are ready. So it's shocking. People are shocked that there's a lot of planning, and it is a lot of collaboration. Like, I'm not just one person who goes out to places and say, hey, you want some IBM gear? It's a whole team that backs one account. And I think even the clients don't even realize it until they get in there, that it's like 10 people to this one client. They're like, it's all of you supporting us? It's like, yeah, we can even bring in more just to make sure that you get the best thing going on, because IBM really values our customer satisfaction above all. So that was the one shocking thing about my role.
I think for me, it was a question that I got and I answered the right way in my interview 33 years ago almost. And that was, how often do you expect to actually be writing? And what percentage of your time do you think you'll be writing as a technical writer? And I said, took a wild guess, and I realized it was probably not going to be as high as I thought it would be. So I said 10, 25%. And he said, you're right, because the rest of the time you're educating yourself, you're learning about things, you're trying to work with other people, you're collaborating on teams on how everything's going to go together. So that was a surprise. I thought I was just going to sit in a corner and write documents, type up things all the time. And I think the other thing I thought is something that Nikki talked about, which is just the reputation that we have with clients. All my life growing up, you heard people talk about working in the professional world and complaining about this and complaining about their supplier and complaining to another company about something. And I know people do complain to IBM, but the amount of work that we put in to satisfy a customer and make sure that we keep one sometimes really surprises me. And we may get bashed in the press for any of a number of different things, or reputationally for other things. But I know one thing that people keep coming back to us for, or something that closes a deal for us quite often, is our reputation for helping the client after the sale.
Awesome, thank you so much. So we have time for one more question, and this is specifically for Nikki. So you know that we've mentioned that you use a lot of your UX and UI techniques within your work. Do you recommend any upskilling for students to get into to help enhance their resume and make them more palatable to employees like IMB?
So yeah, the short answer, yeah, you can always upskill yourself. And you can pick a number of different things. I've noticed recently, at least in my year, that a lot of really diverse backgrounds were hired. Like, I have a friend who she's a very smart girl. She is a tech seller like me, but her major was actually hospitality at Cornell. So at first she thought she was, yeah, right. She thought she was going to go into hotel management and this, that, and the third. She does, her minor was information architecture. So she has tech in her, but it was hospitality. And so at first, a lot of people were like, why was she hired? Who is this chick? Like, is it going to work? But it actually worked out perfectly because they put her in our hospitality portion of sales, which was, you know, the Hyatts and the Marriotts and all that, those accounts. And it helped out a lot because she knew the lingo very well to sell to them better. She would come in there like, or come into these meetings very early on, and there would be some IBMers who were there for years, but because she interned working at a hotel or she doing all these other stuff, she could come in easy and say, you know, I know what it's like to work in these spaces. If you had this IBM product, you can do this, this, and this, and kind of help out the employees and do this. And she came from a very first person experience. And that's something that you can't duplicate or upskill. Like I can learn about hospitality, but she experienced it. So I say having, of course, having the technical skills like learning Python or learning like some mock-up tools if you want is always good. But I think having experience in different things that you just like helps. Like for me, you heard about my background with the wine and spirits industry, and that helped me land my role in distribution because I had to work with wine and spirit industries. And I also worked at a Westchester wine warehouse. And so that side thing, which was a hobby for me, became something very useful because then my manager was like, oh, you already know this company because I worked with them when I was just a wine stalker at the store. And I was like, yeah, I worked with them because they are a distributor. Well, IBM supports them. So how about you go in, use your connects and talk to them because you know firsthand what it's like to use their site. So why not make suggestions to them? And I didn't even realize how amazing that was. So I think if you just open yourselves up, maybe check out what interests you a lot. Like it could be a random hobby. I've seen people who loved animals and almost a zoology, they came into IBM and they started doing something there. There's people who really loved food, and we have a really big reputation with food in the industry. Like a lot of them worked for Walmart because Walmart does a lot of tracking their food and that supply chain. So you would be shocked how sometimes these random interests connects to a tech company, but IBM wants to insert themselves in as many spaces as possible. So they value, that's why we keep going back to diversity, because it helps to have such a diverse background. Like who knew my side hobby of wine or Alex's hospitality degree would be so helpful in our very technical roles. So yes, if you find a language that you like, a programming language that you like, or a mock-up tool or this, that, and third, of course, play around with it, get to know it better and whatnot. But I would say that, you know, tech is always going to update and IBM is always going to teach you. So you shouldn't be too worried that you need to be the master of Python. Like I'm not a master of Python, but they will teach me Python. They have. They've also taught me other languages to use, and I have resources to go back to learn. But the one thing I think they value a lot more now is diversity of background, what you did and what you like and what you can bring specific expertise into. And then they'll teach you tech. So that's my answer on that.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for such an engaging and powerful conversation. One of the things that I take away from this talk is that, you know, diversity and identity is super important right now, especially in the environment that we're going into, where we're not accepting, you know, not allowing underrepresented people in an environment anymore just because of their backgrounds. So again, thank you to Paul Austin and Nikki Brown for that wonderful insight. So thank you all for participating today. We would love for you to complete our post-session feedback survey via the Google form link that's going to be linked within the chat. Please note that we are asking participants to complete this form every single time they attend an Imagine 2022 session. Each successful submission will count as one entry for the week's prizes. The more events you attend and submit the survey for, the more chances that you have to win. Also, please don't forget to check out this week's exciting programs. If you're interested, you can attend tonight's session, the Imagine 2022 day session with Kathleen Dickinson, M6, starting at 5 p.m. We'll put the Zoom link in the chat right now. We've also added the link to the Imagine 2022 website so that you can check out all the other amazing programs happening for the rest of the week. So once again, thank you both for your amazing insight, and thank everyone else for attending.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. Thanks, everybody.